And good evening, I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, the CNN exclusive. We are just learning that former President Trump's legal team and the Justice Department are now in direct talks about the federal investigation into January 6th. This is a significant development because it is the first time that we actually know that they're talking, right? It shows Trump is involved in this. The two sides are speaking as Attorney General Merrick Garland's investigation ramps up. According to sources, these talks revolve around whether Trump would be able to shield conversations that he had while president from federal investigators. Now, keep in mind, the context on this is that we have just learned that the Justice Department was gearing up to battle former Trump officials who might try and keep their conversations with the former president from federal investigators. I want to go straight to Caitlin Polans. She helped break this story, and there are so many crucial details here, Caitlin, that you have been breaking. So tell me what you can. What more are you learning about these talks, and considering they're with the former president's attorneys, with him, what does this mean for the DOJ's investigation?
Well, Erin, it really is significant that they're talking here. Justice Department criminal investigators looking into January 6th and Donald Trump's defense lawyers. What they're talking about is this interest Trump has to protect and keep secret, if he can, conversations he was having in the White House. This all is coming after a steady drumbeat of developments in this grand jury investigation out of D.C. in recent weeks. We know that prosecutors have been asking about top Trump campaign officials in their fake elector probe. We know they're searching devices of lawyers Trump was close to after the election. And then two top officials from the Office of the Vice President went into the grand jury and would have been able to testify about most of what they witnessed, except for some of those direct conversations with Trump. So over this last week, a court fight over executive privilege has been brewing. We don't have confirmation it's happened yet between Trump and the Justice Department. And then we know, and we were able to confirm, that White House counsel Pat Cipollone and one of his deputies, Pat Philbin, were receiving grand jury subpoenas going into the grand jury. So with all of that foundation, these direct talks come in between Trump and the Justice Department, and they're about preventing some of these grand jury witnesses from testifying about everything, where the lines are that Trump has or that he wants to draw around himself and around the presidency.
Then is, well, this is Trump's attorneys, so he's obviously fully in the loop here. How is the former president responding to this?
Well, Erin, in a lot of ways, it appears to be typical Trump in this situation. Sources are telling our reporting team on this that Trump's lawyers have warned him indictments are possible, and they're talking about defense strategies. But Trump, when he's hearing this, he's been asking them if they really believe he will be charged with any crime. He also seems to be skeptical that these types of cases would materialize either out of the federal investigation or this grand jury investigation in Georgia. We also know that he's not fully listening to the advice he's getting because his advisors have cautioned him to stay away from people who might get swept up in these January 6th probes. That includes his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who we know was witness to so much in the West Wing, was so central in the White House after the election as Trump wanted to unravel his loss. But Meadows is still in that circle with Trump. And Erin, we understand they are still in touch.
All right, Caitlin Polans, thank you very much with all that new reporting. So let's go to Kim Whaley, former federal prosecutor. She's also the author of How to Read the Constitution and Why, along with John Avlon, our senior political analyst. So, Kim, what is the significance of this, and how concerning is this as a development for former President Trump?
Well, Attorney General Merrick Garland has been very tight-lipped about this investigation, but I agree with his predecessor, Eric Holder, who recently said that we are likely to see indictments of Donald Trump. So that's kind of the big question. I do think it's coming down the pike. Here, it sounds like the Justice Department's concerned about drawn-out litigation around executive privilege. In this moment, it's Joe Biden who actually controls executive privilege. That doesn't mean this can't get teased out. Of course, the Supreme Court in United States versus Nixon held that grand jury investigations can supersede executive privilege. So I think Donald Trump's going to lose that battle. But the fact that his lawyers are engaging in this and telling him that he better beware, indictments could come, I think, are very serious news for the president, former president, but very good news for democracy, the rule of law, and the Constitution, frankly, Erin.
Well, obviously significant, as you're saying, that you see that is where this is going from your analysis. John, sources tell CNN that Trump is talking with his advisors, his inner circle, about that issue, whether he'll be indicted. And there's no question about it. The Justice Department is clearly accelerating their investigation. Maybe it had been moving more quickly than people gave them credit for, but they now have all the ducks up and it's boom, 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 right? It is getting closer and closer to Trump.
It certainly seems to be. This reporting is significant because it establishes the fact that the Department of Justice and Trump's lawyers have been in direct contact. That is huge. But I do think we need to be careful about saying that that will necessarily lead to an indictment of an ex-president. We are not there yet. And I think it's important we proceed with what we know. What we do know is there are not only questions about privilege, but also that the lens seems to be focusing on the White House and people in the White House and Trump's immediate orbit's role in this. But let's just proceed with what we know. But it is historic what we're learning today. Without getting to the question of whether or not Donald Trump will definitely be indicted.
So, Kim, I don't know if you remember the reporting recently, right, on the heels of Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, right, about Trump and, ketchup on the wall, was that, Trump had reached out to someone he ordinarily never reaches out to, sort of a member of the staff at the White House, right? And after that Cassidy Hutchinson testimony. And we are now learning that he's ignored his lawyer's advice to avoid speaking with current and former aides who are actually embroiled in the January 6th committee investigation, specifically Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff. Trump has been instructed to cut out contact with him because, of course, Meadows could become a fact witness if he ends up being pushed to cooperate with federal investigators, right, and has to choose between himself and Trump when it ultimately comes down to it. What does it mean, Kim, for Trump legally that he is reaching out to these aides when he's been told not to?
It just means that these conversations that he has about potentially the events leading up to, during, and after January 20th, after he left office, right, January 6th, January 20th, they would not be covered by executive privilege under any conception of that because he was no longer president. So his lawyers probably said, listen, don't talk to Mark Meadows, who was at the center of all this. Cassidy Hutchinson testified that he burned documents, right? There's some allegations that his team might have, sought to interfere with her testimony. So Mark Meadows is at the center of all of this. If the Justice Department gets him to sit down in front of a grand jury and really spill the beans and maybe cooperate, I think that also bodes well for him, poorly for him. Although I agree, of course, it's speculation. I'm just saying down the road, I think it's a fair assumption that we're going to see some indictments, if not from the Justice Department, from the Georgia probe relating to the election.
Well, and, Trump always being the one, I hope there's tapes when he knows there aren't, but it's his way of sort of trying to, get people to question whether someone's being honest. At this point in the investigation, it would seem to me very reasonable for a lot of people having conversations with the former president to be recording them. I'm just saying that, you shouldn't be talking to anybody if you're not willing to have it out there, that you got to take that risk. Yeah. John, so Trump's former impeachment lawyer, Ty Cobb, told me that Meadows is perfectly positioned to be the John Dean of this mess. Now, he was referring, of course, to Nixon's former White House counsel, the Watergate whistleblower. What would Meadows' cooperation with federal investigators mean for Trump? I mean, is he going to be the person who ultimately gets this over the line, and without him it doesn't get there, or not?
Well, he may very well be, because presumably the chief of staff is the person who knows the most about the president's intent and state of mind in and around January 6th. The John Dean parallel, I mean, Nixon's as close a parallel as we've got here. So, you heard, the precedent of executive privilege coming up, and now John Dean. So I actually called John Dean before coming on air with you to see what he thought of the parallel. And here's what he said. Look, there are parallels to the extent that John Dean flipped when he thought he was being set up to be the fall guy. And there have been, suggestions that maybe he'll try to blame it on, Meadows or Eastman, and that is an issue. The difference is, though, is Dean was sincere. Tapes showed that he had been opposing a lot of the worst impulses inside the White House. And he was a young enough man where he could remake his life. The constraints on Meadows are different, it seems to me, in fundamental ways. First of all, he seems to have been a go-along, get-along kind of guy. Second of all, the impact of the partisan economy in corrupting people is profound. Mark Meadows' retirement plan effectively is to monetize his role as chief of staff and being a good soldier to Donald Trump and the party. And that's a constraining factor that's very different than what folks in the Nixon White House faced, just as the existence of hyperpartisan media is also a different factor than folks that the Nixon administration placed.
Absolutely. John, Kim, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
New tonight, a jury ordering conspiracy theorist Alex Jones to pay $4.1 million in damages for lying about the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre and calling it a hoax. Now, it is a far cry from what the parents sought, which was $150 million. These are the parents of a 6-year-old, Jesse Lewis, one of the 20 children and 6 adults killed in the 2012 shooting in Newtown, Connecticut. Now, Jones repeatedly claimed that the shooting was staged. But when it finally came now, right, 10 years later, to the trial, he said he now believed it to be 100% real. Joni O'Sullivan is out front. And Joni, look, we didn't know when this verdict was going to come. Obviously came really just before we came to air. $4 million, an award. The family had asked for $150 million. How are they responding to the news?
Yeah, Erin, I mean, of course, it seems like a drop in the bucket. We've heard in this case how much money Alex Jones has made through lies down through the years, tens of millions of dollars through his companies. The parents of Jesse Lewis responding tonight saying that they are thrilled actually with the results and look forward to putting Mr. Jones' money to good use. But of course, again, it is very far away from what they had initially asked for.
So explain, though, where we are, because you've got this, but this is not the end, right? I understand the jury comes back tomorrow and they're going to be talking about the punitive damages that Jones may owe if the court finds his behavior especially offensive. Can you put that into English and tell me what that means in light of this $4 million we found out about today?
Yeah, so what we could learn is that Jones may have to pay up a lot more, given, and we have seen, so much evidence in this trial of how malicious, so much of this behavior was and the effect that it had on families. And Jesse's parents, in that same statement from their lawyer tonight, said that, Jones will not sleep easy tonight. And look, I think it's also important to point out that, Jones is at the nexus of so much in this country right now, and the place that this country is in. And I think this trial really showed that. We saw that the real effect that these conspiracy theories and lies have on families like those, the parents of the Sandy Hook children, and then also, of course, the role that Jones played in relation to January 6th, and now, of course, interest in the contents of his cell phone. So you can really see from the political to the very personal, the effects and corrosive nature of conspiracy theories.
And certainly, obviously, he's tried to declare bankruptcy. You talk about all the money he's earned. It's unclear what the payout will actually even be versus what the jury has now awarded. Never mind what happens tomorrow. But there are other legal cases facing Jones, right?
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think somebody pointed out during the trial that there's speech is free, but there should be a cost to lies. Jones has many more legal fights ahead of him, but we've also seen on his show, on his network online, that he's not stepping away. His enterprise is not stepping away from still kind of spinning all of this BS.
Moments ago, 42 seconds of silence for Brittney Griner at tonight's Phoenix Mercury game. The WNBA star wears the number 42. She was sentenced today to 9 years in a Russian prison after pleading guilty to drug charges. Griner staring straight ahead as her verdict was read. The sentence for her life now, I mean, it is a shocking one, coming after Biden actually had offered Russia's most well-known prisoner in the U.S. in exchange for Griner's freedom. Putin didn't take it. Earlier, though, Griner was emotional.
I had no intent on breaking any Russian laws. I had no intent, I did not conspire or plan to commit this crime. I made an honest mistake, and I hope that in your ruling that it doesn't end my life here.
Today's sentence comes after Griner's arrest more than 5 months ago at Moscow's main international airport. Customs officials say they discovered vape cartridges with cannabis oil in her luggage. She maintains she accidentally put them in her suitcase and that she has a prescription for medical marijuana. President Biden releasing a statement today that reads in part, Russia is wrongfully detaining Brittney. It's unacceptable, and I call on Russia to release her immediately. Out front now, Kylie Atwood at the State Department. And Kylie, you have broken so much news on this and, Biden's offer of the most well-known Russian prisoner, the arms dealer Victor Bout, to try to get Griner back. That has not resulted in anything thus far. What more are you learning about what the Biden administration will do next?
Yeah, well, no doubt, Erin, that today's sentencing puts more pressure on those negotiations, right? And I think there's a few factors to consider here. First of which, the Biden administration officials have always believed that a sentencing was necessary in order for a prisoner swap to actually come to fruition. So they may view this as a positive moment in the direction towards a prisoner swap, because Russia could come back to the table with some serious counter proposals, given that the Biden administration said their previous counter proposal wasn't a serious one. But you also have to consider the fact that President Putin may view Brittney Griner as having leverage over the United States. This isn't exactly a great moment in terms of U.S.-Russia relations, so they may not be willing to come back to the table seriously right now. What the White House has said thus far is they aren't willing to detail where President Biden stands in terms of if he's willing to put more on the table, to put a new prisoner swap proposal on the table. But the Biden administration faces increasing pressure from the family, from the teammates, from the supporters of Brittney Griner, with one congresswoman saying today that the Biden administration has more cards in the deck and essentially urging them to put a more formidable, put a heavier proposal on the table to the Russians. So they are facing all of these pressures, and we will watch to see how this unfolds over the next few weeks now that this critical sentencing of 9 years is in. Erin?
All right, Kylie, thank you very much. Let's go now to Democratic Congressman Colin Allred, because he's not just a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, but he has been working with the State Department specifically on Brittney Griner and getting her home. So I really appreciate your time. I mean, look, you knew there was going to be a verdict. You know, did you think it was going to be this? Were you at all surprised today?
Not surprised, but still heartbroken, because it was heartbreaking to see Brittney in distress and to really see the toll that this process has taken on her. But in many ways, Erin, it is actually a positive, and I know this is hard to understand for some folks. It is actually positive that we've gotten to this point already. Trevor Reed and Paul Whelan had to wait much longer before they got their trials and their sentencing. And it is true that from the beginning, we believed that it wasn't until the sentencing was actually finished that the Russians would actually negotiate with us in good faith. So it is actually moving forward. As depressing as today is, seeing a 9-year sentence for such a minor thing that in most cases in Russia would only result in a fine, it is actually in some ways a positive that it's happened so quickly.
All right, so that's important to explain. But where we are is that the Biden administration offered to exchange both Griner and Paul Whelan, whom you mentioned, for Victor Bout, right? The infamous arms dealer, the most well-known, publicly Russian prisoner, right? Nicolas Cage played him in a movie. Russian officials responded saying, okay, add Vadim Krashikov, a former colonel from their spy agency, to that deal as well. Now, that's been described to us as not really a serious offer. How do you see it? And do you have any sense of where negotiations stand now?
Yeah. Well, I really can't confirm or deny any of the reports about what was exactly put forward in our package. I just know that it was a strong one, and one that we have taken to the highest levels of the Russian government and asked them to consider. And they have said repeatedly that under Russian law, they could not even consider a prisoner swap until we reach this point. So I do think that now is the time where we'll see the negotiations in earnest and expect, hopefully, a counteroffer of some kind. What my colleagues and I in the Congress have tried to do, working with the administration, is to make sure they know that we support their efforts to try and get Brittney and Paul Whelan home, understanding that it's going to have probably a high price.
Right. Now, look, I'm sure I'm not alone when I hear Russians citing rule of law and their rules on when they're going to do things, given what we're seeing, the behavior in Ukraine and other things. I mean, they say that when they want to say it. So to that effect, Congressman, do you feel like the U.S. has given Putin in any way an upper hand by making these negotiations public, and frankly, by offering something like Victor Bout before there was a sentence, when they knew Russia was saying, wait until after she's sentenced?
Well, I trust the administration. I think they made the fact of the offer, not the details, which is still, as I said, I'm not confirming that, but the fact of the offer public. They did that, I think, to pressure Russia to make a counteroffer and to show how seriously they're taking trying to get Brittney and Paul Whelan home. You know, we have a fundamental disconnect here, where in America, we value every single American citizen so highly that we'll do almost anything to get them home. In Russia, people are expendable. and that's just true. Some are more valuable than others in Putin's Russia. And so they are going to be using this as a way to try and get some leverage over the United States. But I know that the equities that the Biden administration is weighing is what can we do to get Brittney and Paul Whelan home without harming the long-term national security of the United States. They're not going to do that. But whatever they do, I think, to get her home as soon as possible, I think that clock in many ways has really started now.
Congressman Allred, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. So now you've heard the congressman lay some of this out. Paul Colby joins me, the former chief of the CIA's Central Eurasia Division. So, look, good to talk to you again. Look, the U.S. has offered, we understand from our reporting, both Griner and Paul Whelan in exchange for Victor Bout, right, the infamous arms dealer, closest thing to a household name of Russian prisoners in the U.S. Russian officials say add that former colonel in, Vadim Krasikov. He's accused of murder, and he's in German custody right now. So how do you see this, Paul? Does Putin have the upper hand here, or is that not the way to look at it?
No, I don't think that's the way to look at it. Look, Russia has taken political prisoners, taken hostages for decades. It's a tried and true mechanism for them to spring their own criminals or their own spies who've been caught and convicted. You go back to when Colonel Abel was exchanged for Francis Gary Powers, U-2 spy pilot. So there have been exchanges of prisoners for a long time. In this case, Russia is always looking to find trade bait. And so they'll manufacture cases, they'll set people up, or they'll exploit very minor crimes with extraordinary sentences.
You hear some people say that on some level this is personal for Putin, perhaps in part because Ukraine, but also because of who Brittney Griner is, right? A member of the LGBTQ community, an African American. Is this in any way, I guess using the word personal might be a little bit off, but is it personal for Putin, this particular situation, or not?
No, look, I don't think anything's personal for Putin. He looks at things with a cold, dead eyes. Look, they simply saw a hostage that they could take that they saw would have high publicity value, high emotive value. Paul Whelan has sat in jail for a number of years, and we've not had the same degree of publicity. So they probably calculated pretty well. Here's an opportunity. We're going to grab it, and we're going to squeeze it for everything that it's worth. It's not surprising that they've come out with so-called counteroffers, if it's accurate, looking to spring convicted murderers. This guy, Krasnikov, was a bicycle assassin who gunned down a political asylee in Germany in broad daylight in the middle of a park. No moral equivalence.
So when does this happen? Do they drag it out for years? Does this happen sooner than that?
I have no idea, but it certainly could drag out for years. Look at how long Whelan has been sitting in prison. Look at how long Khodorkovsky sat in prison. Look at how long Navalny's going to sit in prison. They're perfectly happy to have this play out. When they get to the right point, when they feel that they can cut a deal, when they've reached that tipping point, then they may do it when Putin perceives it to his advantage. But I think, echoing the words of the congressman, it's important to note that U.S. does look after its own citizens and will, despite how unseemly it might seem, how unequivalent it is to trade this, we are looking out for the best for our own citizens. I simply say to don't go to Russia. You'll be vulnerable.
Yeah. Tonight, the hometown paper of an American held prisoner in Russia is calling on the Biden administration to do more to get him back. Mark Fogle is a 61-year-old teacher from the Pittsburgh area. He was recently sentenced to 14 years in a hard labor camp for possession of medical marijuana. 14 years in a hard labor camp. Like Brittney Griner, Fogle was arrested when he arrived in Russia, and half an ounce of marijuana was found in his luggage. An editorial in today's Pittsburgh Post-Gazette urges the Biden administration to treat his case with the same urgency as Griner and Paul Whelan's, saying, quote, while the U.S. State Department treats them as wrongfully detained, it does not treat Mr. Fogle that way, although he was arguably in prison for less reason than they were. The State Department has yet to explain why it treats the cases so differently, because if it does so, Fogle may miss out on any potential horse trading that could bring him home from Russian prison with the other two. Ann Fogle is out front now. She is Mark's sister. And Ann, I really appreciate your taking the time to talk about your brother. I mean, the story is incredible. He's detained under extremely similar circumstances as those of Brittney Griner. So first, what's your reaction? She gets a 9-year sentence in a penal colony. Your brother's now starting a 14-year sentence in a hard labor camp.
Well, you can see how completely out of whack the sentencing is to the crime, especially when you're looking at the fellow that they're trying to trade for him, who shot a man in broad daylight. It's so demoralizing that the Russians are taking it to this extreme.
And I know you've said that you felt Mark was given basically what amounts to a death sentence. And, I just want to ask you, what has it been like for you to hear the U.S. government talk about Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan? I'm sure you want them to come home too, of course, but they're talking about them. They're putting those names on the table to try to put out a deal, but they're not mentioning your brother's name.
It's really, it's very hard to hear that. And I have not given up hope. I have a lot of faith that they are working some other deal, that they are going to pull some card out of their sleeve at this point. To leave him there would be really inhumane. And I know that that's not how our country works. They really can't leave him behind. He's 61. He's in there for bringing medical marijuana in for a very chronic pain condition that he has. After he was sentenced, he fell at the detention center that he was at, and he was sent to a hospital detention center, and he was there up until this week. And he's miraculously been cured. And he doesn't need treatment. Of course, we know that that's not true. And we're just trying to bring his story to light. He can't be there. He cannot stay there. And they have to bring him home with the other two. This is the package for someone like Victor Boot. There should be a more gusto given by the government. We need more gusto for this. Better negotiating.
And, what have they talked to you? Are they talking to you about, why they haven't formally classified him as wrongfully detained yet, which is, technically something they need to do to engage in any sort of a prisoner swap for him? I mean, have they been responsive or explained anything to you?
They have not really explained anything at all, other than the fact that my brother perhaps didn't check a box that he should have. When it came to this and giving information to family, we're really unclear on why we're not getting better information. We've had nothing really, and we have.
And I hope that
we've had an amazing outpouring of support from his students and from his colleagues. It's been amazing. There's a petition. I think there are over 12,000 signatures on it at this point. They need to listen. They need to listen. This is an amazing person who has put so much more in than into American diplomacy that he's never going to get credit for. He's been teaching American and international children for 35 years. Yeah. So we need them to pay attention.
Well, and I hope that they will. I hope that they'll hear you. Obviously, this is such a difficult moment, but a crucial moment, and hopefully one that can draw attention to your brother in addition to Paul and Brittney. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate the opportunity to share the story.
All right. Well, I'm glad to talk to you. And new tonight, Team Trump's latest target. Yahoo News' Michael Isikoff reporting that allies of former President Trump in Georgia are now pushing a campaign to recall Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. She is, of course, leading the probe into Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 Georgia election. The organizers admit that the recall campaign, which Trump is reportedly aware of, is a long shot, but they don't care because their goal is just pure and simple to politicize this and damage Willis. You'll see the quotes. Keep in mind that many legal experts believe that this criminal investigation in Georgia could be the single biggest legal threat to Trump and lead to criminal charges. One of them who thinks this is the biggest threat is his former White House lawyer, Ty Cobb, who told us, quote, the Georgia case under the control of the Fulton County District Attorney appears to pose a serious threat of indictment to the former president. Keep in mind, Ty Cobb is Trump's former defense attorney. And Michael Isikoff is now out front with this reporting. So, Michael, let's just start first with Fani Willis, the DA, right? She's been very aggressive on her investigation when it comes to the pace. It has moved rapidly. You've got a grand jury, says she's looking to wrap up by next month. So that puts a ticking time clock on what Team Trump is trying to do. What are they exactly trying to do?
Well, what they're trying to do is muddy the water. And, you know, the argument is Fani Willis is a Democratic district attorney. She has targeted Donald Trump. This is political. That's the argument from Trump allies. And so game on, we're going to politicize this. We're going to make this a political issue. We're going to make the argument that Fani Willis is ignoring crime in Atlanta, escalating murder rates, violence on the rise, and instead focusing on Donald Trump. So they're going to argue that this is disqualifying on its face. Fani Willis should be replaced. As you point out in your introduction, this is a long shot. Georgia recall law is exceedingly stringent, and you need 30% of all the registered voters in the relevant jurisdiction. In Fulton County, that's 800,000 voters. 300,000 would be needed to sign those signatures. That's a pretty steep haul for the recall folks. But I don't think they're really thinking about getting this on the ballot. This is all about politics, muddying the water, and making the argument that Fani Willis, that somehow the investigation is political and therefore illegitimate.
And I mean, from your report, right, that they would consider that a win if you just, I mean, which is incredible to say this, right, that if you further degrade people's belief in the rule of law and institutions in this country, they consider that a win. I just want to maybe translate this a little bit differently, but they're telling you this directly. It's not that you're coming here and sort of paraphrasing. One top Georgia Republican said to you, quote, the purpose is to politicize it. Right? The literal quote to you was, the purpose is to politicize this. You, Willis, want to make this a political game? We'll make this about politics. I mean, they admit it to you, Michael.
Exactly. This source who's directly involved in raising money for the recall was quite clear. And look, this is of a piece of Trump's strategy much larger than this. He's also facing the potential of a Justice Department indictment. Now, we should point out, and you indicated that in your intro, the Willis investigation is further along than the Justice Department investigation. She's been moving much more rapidly. Rudy Giuliani is going to be appearing before a special grand jury in Fulton County next week. Lindsey Graham has been subpoenaed for phone calls he made to Brad Raffensperger. He's challenging that. There's going to be court arguments on that coming up in the next few weeks. So this is really heating up in Georgia. Now, on the national stage, Trump is facing the DOJ investigation, and he is talking about announcing his run for president potentially right after the November elections as a way to forestall Merrick Garland from indicting him. His thinking seems to be if he announces as president, it will make it that much harder for the Justice Department to indict a candidate for president at this time, a Republican candidate for president. So Trump is on both fronts doing everything he can to try to politicize this.
All right, Michael, thank you very much with your reporting tonight.